the use and diversion of water on Mill, Deer, and Antelope Creeks. There's individuals you heard from today in this room, and there's those who haven't been in this room today that, if I provided the opportunity, could provide you much greater knowledge and understanding of those three drainages than I can, those creeks. But I need to raise a more fundamental question, because as we proceed throughout this process and future processes, sometimes fundamental procedural or policy issues get hidden under the detail of the substantive discussion. And the issue I want to raise for you has been raised by a couple of the board members today, and that is, do the circumstances here justify emergency rulemaking? And I want to look at it from a factual standpoint, because I really do think in a broader context, this has definite precedential implications.
I'm sorry, may I interrupt Mr. Rance and ask, are you speaking on item 13 or item 12?
I'm on number 12. I'm on number 12.
I wasn't aware
There's a resolution for
we're
emergency
still
rulemaking.
accepting comments on item 12.
I'd be happy to. He's the last person. One more input before we talk.
I mean, we've jumped around so much, Tam. I honestly don't. I thought we were still on 12. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I just thought we finished with the public comments on item 12 yesterday already. Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. And if I am, my apologies. I stepped down of the room for a minute, but I did.
Forth so
I
much
had-
that
I'll be very quick, probably,
Yeah.
and get through it.
I don't want to reopen.
And I'm going to use, for my discussion, I'm going to use day change sheet circulated on 5/21/14, so we can refer to that. On item, in the middle of the front page on items or section number 16, the staff laid out 3 criteria, and all 3 of those criteria had to be satisfied for emergency. Those three criteria were there need to be emergency drought conditions. I think that's a given the governor's proclamation. That's conceded. That's no debate on my part. Obviously, we're there. The third criteria was unique attributes of the 3 tributaries, and like I acknowledge and concede, I have not enough information, so I concede that one. But the critical criteria that I'd like this board to consider about in its deliberations is what was the second criteria, and again, all 3 have to be met, was the criteria of a need for prompt action. And the operative word, and from my perspective in this, is the need for prompt action in the context of emergency rulemaking. And if we look at the very top of that change page, we started out at about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon under the premise the National Marine Fisheries Service has identified minimum flows necessary to prevent extirpation of these species. That's a very specific ESA standard. Extirpation, for those of us who don't know that, is that this is necessary to avoid the extinction of the species. Under that context, I can understand the need for moving with emergency regulations if the NOAA fisheries or NIMS made a case for extirpation. But the staff decided to move, in the new language that I have in front of me anyways, move from the standard of extirpation of the species to a level of minimum flows necessary below which significant harm to the species would occur. Now, from ESA standpoint, and many of us in this room have dealt with ESA for a long time, that's a downgrading of the standard in terms of a context of emergency that I think you all should talk about. We're talking about extinction of a species which precipitated this rule package to now significant harm. So that raises the question of how promptly do we need action? The second aspect under ESA that I'd like to raise about is the term significant harm. Significant harm is an ambiguous term in ESA, as those of us who've dealt with it know. It can be anything from harassment to habitat modification to actual injury or killing of individual species. So that term, the harm, is a very broad scope that needs to be flushed out. And as we all know, the word significant is a fact-finding issue. What constitutes significant? And the only reason I bring that up is I don't necessarily disagree with the conclusion of staff or the NOAA fisheries that is significant harm, but I do think there's an opportunity to back away from the emergency aspect and give an opportunity for a full vetting of the notion of significant harm associated with the diversions in these streams. If we were still in the context of extirpation or extinction of these species, we'd be at a much higher level of scrutiny. I understand that. So let me conclude with one last point. The reason I bring this to your attention today, again, I don't have a position, I don't have a feeling one way or another on these 3 creeks, is what you decide today in terms of what is the criteria you apply for determining whether or not to adopt emergency rules has significant policy and procedural implications for further efforts. And I really think that's critical. Not just all the discussion we've had about diversions, water rights, seniority versus junior, that's extremely critical too. But the process you're determining today will lay the foundation for the process future. I would suggest to you that the fact that you moved from extirpation of the species to significant harm might give you the flexibility to have the staff continue to rewrite the language if you want to continue rulemaking, pursue voluntary agreements in the meantime, and you can determine how promptly you need to act. If you feel you need to act in the next few weeks or so, you can ask for an expedited rulemaking process, but it gives everybody a chance to bring to the table that discussion, seen as the standard has shifted from extirpation to significant harm. I appreciate the opportunity.
I don't want to be arguing with you about it, but the time frame is pretty significant. It's not like there's a lot of time to figure out what to do here and to hang it on the word. I appreciate your point of view.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
I have a couple other if necessaries on 12 from people who have already spoken. I want to stick with 13 and talk about what we're doing and then go back to 12. The ping-pongings, I didn't know I had other cards. So I'm sort of curious if you want to have a conversation and take a short break, if that works for you. No, if that works for you, that's okay.
We've got to go. I mean, she's got to go to Modesto.
I'm in a bind because I have to go to Modesto for a presentation tonight.
Oh.
So I was just checking to see if the language that they had, that they were talking about is in there, and then I'm just going to leave.
All right, well, let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I just got worried when I saw.
Yes, of course. Okay. Sorry about that. So are you going to put the language up now or hand it out? Oh, no, that's 12.
Yeah.
So 13.
I'm on 12.
Am I wrong? Would you rather finish 12 than finish 13?
Well, no, because we've got to vote. We have to vote. 13 is not a vote.
13's not a vote, 12's a vote. I'm sorry, we got to go to 12. You're right. Sorry.
Goes crazy.
Okay, so change sheet and,
We have, we've provided change sheets to you. We have it, we can display it, and they're also on the back table.
on the back table. Okay.
So what we have
Next
done,
time, 3-day hearing. Sorry.
yes, what we have done, Courtney's going to put up the change sheet. This is change sheet 3 that we circulated today, and we indicate on this sheet that this is including the changes that we had in change sheet 2, because some of them were changes to the changes, but I'll walk us through several of these. There's no change from what we had this morning, but I'll highlight the additional changes that,
Okay.
that happened today.
Okay.
So starting here at the top, the one on page 2, the first 2 that are shown there was no change to those. So you can scroll down, Courtney.
Sorry,
to-
I'll just note the only change is, as you see, the second change, it's numbered paragraph 18. On change sheet 2, that was numbered paragraph 16. So that's just a renumbering because
okay.
of there's some additional 16 and 17.
But and scroll just a little bit further down on E, and this occurs 3 times. This was regarding the discussion
next
of
business day,
how
right?
quickly we respond. So we now are, the deputy director shall no later than the next business day suspend curtailment orders that are based on the need for a particular flow volume with no further changes from what we already discussed this morning. But that was changed earlier. We had 5 days.
Okay.
And continue scrolling. And that's through all of the E's, okay, up there. No change also to that on page 7B. continue scrolling to the third page, actually to page 4.
How
Russ,
come
you
we
need to
can't
get
hear you?
closer to
Yeah,
the
get
Sorry.
closer.
microphone.
Yeah.
To page 4, because everything else was no change from what we'd had this morning. But on the final page, we have the additional changes. At the top of page 4, we have added some language now to the resolution, to the regulation rather, about when the regulation would go into effect. So we're saying that this
section, which is section 877, which is the section that contains the flows, the numbers, the requirements. So this is new language that would go right after the introductory paragraph in C.
So basically says it would only go into effect if, so that allows for a sort of percentage call on whether it matters,
That was the intention, is to...
or if people back out. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And then continuing down
Interesting.
on page 4, this is now adding elements to the resolution, speaking first in number 16 to the voluntary efforts.
So 16 addresses the existing voluntary agreements
Oh,
that
to
are in place
acknowledge
on
that they
Mill
exist.
and Antelope, and 17 addresses the potential for them on Deer Creek.
And with a typo in 17, future is misspelled in the third line. We will correct that.
Interesting. Okay.
And then back to the resolution on page 2 of the proposed resolution, speaking to the reasonable use issue that had been discussed. And also on page 3 of the resolution, adding a paragraph also speaking to the reasonableness. Oh, also on page 3 of the resolution, adding to the whereas number 10, also speaking to the reasonableness. This finding is narrowly targeted.
Interesting. Okay. Comments, questions, concerns?
Well, sorry.
Yeah, no, please,
I'll
go
just,
ahead.
I'll just jump in and say that I was going to offer an amendment to strike Mill and Antelope, but I mean, it's my sense that the rest of the board isn't interested in going that direction. So I do appreciate staff working on this language. I still don't think there's an emergency, but with it not going into effect, then I think my concerns are covered. So I'm prepared to support it.
I actually really appreciate what you did fairly quickly to listen to what we and others had to say.
With that, I will move for adoption of this item with change sheet number 1 and change sheet number 2 as just handed to us.
Is that change sheet number 3?
Okay, I'm sorry. With change sheets number 1 and number 3, because number 3 replaces number 2. Got it.
Second, with the change sheet
And the typo
designations.
change.
Oh, yeah, with a typo to correct the spelling of the word future.
Right. Well, I would say, I think this is difficult. I think some people made a lot of very important points, and I actually don't think this is easy, but I do think we are in unusual circumstances that call on us to be more creative and do some things that maybe haven't been done before, which may make some people uncomfortable, but that I do think is what we're called upon to do. I do appreciate the efforts to limit it as much as possible, to encourage what it is we said we wanted to encourage, and to hopefully give some comfort to people. I will want the narrative or whatever communication about it to be much more explicit, but I do appreciate the changes that folks have made. Is there anything else that anyone?
Yeah, I just, I want to affirm how important it is to have this type of work be founded on collaborative efforts. We speak to this in a lot of our forums. This is a very difficult situation, and I'm pleased with staff's responsiveness to the board's questions, stakeholder concerns, to really emphasize the importance of voluntary agreements and cooperation on the ground in these watersheds, and just that there's an implicit trust that we have as the board and staff in the people that live in these areas that are stewards.
Right.
We trust these agreements. We are just doing our part within our authorities to empower them, empower collaboration. That's my greatest hope in all of this work.
And if I just might add, I wanted to especially thank Board Member Diadamo for expressing her concerns and raising a lot of very, very good points and questions. While I may not necessarily agree with everything she said, I think her contribution definitely resulted in a great deal of improvements and clarity in the resolution and the regulations, and I appreciate that.
I do too. I would also add that there's a burden, I think, put on the staff from the conversations we've had to be able to be aware of what's happening in these 3 particular creeks, to communicate very well with all of those grower diverters and landowners, and to communicate the intent of this as well as how it will be executed, and that will have a tremendous impact on how we view future requests of this kind. So I think there's a pretty heavy burden on being user-friendly on this one. All right. With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That carries with all the amendments. Thank you all for your time.
Can I ask one question on number 12,
Yeah.
a procedural favor, if I could?
Sure.
When your staff sends the document over to the Office of Administrative Law, would you provide my office with notice, please? And a copy of what you send to the Office of Administrative Law?
Yeah, we can do that, right? There's no reason not. That's all public. Sure. Great. Okay, back to item 13. Thank you all. Thoughts on item 13? I have some thoughts, but I want to leave it to you guys to start. Yeah, you should jump in first.
Yeah, I was going to run. I didn't realize we were going to wrap up on 13, so I'll just give my thoughts real quickly.
Yeah.
First of all, I appreciate everyone's comments, and I'll just say that I think that a lot of people did a good job of explaining why this is not the appropriate vehicle to look at a Term 91 approach. I concur with those concerns. I think that the water quality control plan is the way to go. I actually think it may not be a bad idea to use Term 91 across the board, but we need to go through the planning process and the adjudicatory process that we would be using under a water quality control plan. The other comments that I would make is that it would really be helpful to hone in on the amount of water that either could be lost or that we would have to release additional flows. The 600,000, and I recognize, Mr. Howard, you said, don't pin me to that number, but it'd be good if we could have some dialogue, or staff could, with the Bureau, the department, the stakeholders. I think that Kevin O'Brien and Louis Baird brought up some very good points. Just see if you can get a better sense of how much water we're talking about.
We did that for last year, and it was 800,000 acre-feet of supplemental project water, and that doesn't include delta outflow or in-basin obligations, the contract deliveries. So that was for last year.
It's just that there seemed to be such a wide range of opinion on this. It'd be good to have further dialogue. And then I also would like to see, I guess I'm just kind of married to those charts that I really like that we've been seeing. And as I've been out and about talking with a lot of ag stakeholders, I've been relying on those charts. I've been relying on sort of the option 1 approach. And no one likes it when I get started on the discussion, but then by the time I'm finished and I say we're going to respect, priority rights, people are okay with it. And so I do feel that my credibility is on the line if we kind of change the rules of the game and the boards. And so before we do that, I would be open to a different approach that uses more accurate data. It's always better to have more accurate data than something that's outdated. But I'd like to see what the impacts are, sort of applying it to the charts, throwing option 4 on the board and comparing it to option 1. And I don't remember the witness, but somebody mentioned that it'd be good to, you got to look at both. I think it was Mr. Schutz. You got to look at watershed wide and also watershed specific. So it'd be good to just kind of run a few scenarios to get a better idea. In the event that it looks like we can tighten things up and it's not going to result in any major differences. It's really hard to tell, though, without knowing. I would be happy to go back to all the ag groups and go all over again at this and say, we've changed, we're going to use a different approach, and this is probably, a better, more fair way to do it based on more accurate data. But I'm not convinced yet. Obviously, we're at the beginning stages of this. So we're just, as we know, it's just straw proposals. So thank you.
Good. No, thank you.
And if I could piggyback on that, since Board Member Diadamo mentioned Mr. Schutz, he actually offered another suggestion that I'm very intrigued by and would like to explore further, and that is option 2, but with real-time or improved data.
That is option 4.
No, option,
I have a question related to that.
It is. It's still holding the projects responsible for meeting outflow, but using the Term 91 calculations with real data. So that's option 4, which was kind of the compromise between 2 and 3.
Okay.
And is there, on that point, I think I've heard in briefings that, is it true that we rely on reported use data because we have more access to that to do analyses? Do we struggle with the current structure to get real-time data? And would the regulation help us be more efficient in being responsive and using that data, or is that not an issue at all?
This is Bruce Sikowski. Yes, that definitely is an issue. The data that we do receive in many cases is poor, but in many cases it's very good. So I think what we need to do, or my recommendation, if you were to ask, would be to make sure that we can ground truth the reported data as much as possible.
I mean, the other issue is the real data is in arrears. We don't get it real time. We get it in the annual reports and the triannual reports as they come in. So it's not something that allows you to determine, is the soil moisture content different this year? Is there, is something else happening in the system that's changing the typical pattern of depletions? Is it just a precipitation pattern? Last year we saw high depletions at this time. We've had some precipitation events in April and May that have changed that to some extent. So, the use pattern is different from year to year. So you don't, relying upon previous years, it gets you in the ballpark, but it's not going to get you the exact number.
Right, but aren't you trying to ground truth? You have the data, it's one data set. And then you have other data points that you can use to figure out. So, for example, it rained, things were different, so you didn't pull the trigger on curtailments, in addition to wanting to come to us with options. So you've been trying to be as realistic that you can. It's never going to be perfect, like clockwork.
So, but again, is it the different options? Is there? You just mentioned you still be getting it in arrears, even with option 4.
Yeah, even with option 3 and 4, determining exactly how many diverters need to be curtailed would be dependent upon how much use you think they're making, dependent on their statements. But you would know how much that use is that you need to curtail. So we get a real-time calculation of supplemental project water releases, which is the additional water the projects are releasing to meet delta outflow requirements and other depletions in the system. So we get a real-time
You can still use
calculation of
that
that
data,
number. We
right.
don't know exactly what each individual diverter is using, and we've thought about, you'd probably want some margin of safety on that number to make sure you don't curtail people too soon. So that would be part of the implementation process, is determining what's safe. And, we're lucky we have the projects that they can kind of balance the system and backstop the system. So I don't think there would ever be a circumstance where they wouldn't be continuing to backstop the system, either when the natural flows weren't available or just to tune the system to make sure that we're not curtailing people too soon, either under option 3 or 4, that, they would always play a role in meeting the delta outflow requirements, even in that option 3.
Right, that's why you said
Yeah, with the
backstopping
score,
versus
yeah.
responsible.
May I make a suggestion?
You may. I
We are
wanted to say something, but you can say,
Oh, I'm
you
sorry.
can make the suggestion first. That's
Well,
fine.
why don't you go first, and then I'll tell you.
Well, I just wanted, and it may or may not run afoul of your suggestion. I just think it is one thing in the context of discrete number of water users in a discrete stream system. I think what I'm getting from listening to everybody is that going some of the routes that you suggest, while it has merit, is a little too much for the ecosystem to bear in terms of people assimilating a change. And so I don't know exactly where you're going. This may be where you're going. I do feel a pressure, only a couple of people said it, to move forward on curtailments, at least on the appropriate scale, because there are folks who are relying on that, either for the preservation of their water rights or for collecting their insurance on not getting water, or things that people are expecting us to do. So I do feel like you all need to be able to move expeditiously in some way, and I'm just troubled by stepping too far afield without more conversation, comprehension, and maybe thought.
So, the information that we have indicates that we're past the point where post-1914 appropriators should be appropriating water throughout the Central Valley. And using just about any method that we can dream up, that's what we've already established. So at this point, after listening to all the comments, what I would like to do, and what I would ask the board if they have any comment on, is we're prepared now to send out curtailment notices to post-1914 appropriators, both in the Central Valley and also post-1954 on the Russian. And I'd like to go ahead and make those curtailment notices, get them out in the next day or two. The method we would be applying from a legal perspective would be the first method, the one that uses the pure water right priority system and does not rely on Term 91 calculations. I think that there might be some advantage, and I'm not 100% sure yet, to going ahead with a regulation. And under that circumstance, based on what I'd heard, I'd suggest to the board that if we do regulation, that we do it under Alternative 2, which, again, would use the water right priority system. I think Alternative 3 and 4 are good alternatives that we need to be thinking about as we move through Phase 2. But listening to the concerns of the water right holders, I think that there's a lot of belief out there that it somehow upsets the water right priority system. And in this time of emergency, where what we're trying to do is just effectively administer the state's water right system and not necessarily get into a policy discussion about what the most effective way to do that, or whether one tool is fully consistent with the water right system versus another. I think sticking to the historical methods that people are comfortable with would be most effective, with the least amount of consternation among the water community, who have to bear this unfortunate burden of the drought and curtailments. So right now, I'd prefer us moving forward as quickly as we can, get the post-1914s out, start evaluating the pre-1914s. I think we're likely to be, in the next couple of weeks, moving in that area. There are also some areas where we would need to be curtailing riparians even before pre-1914 because there's no natural flow left in the system. So, you know, we're starting to, as soon as we get this first step done, we're going to have to start dealing with these nuances that people have been talking about. Things like who's responsible for delta diverters,
Right.
what to do with the riparian versus pre-1914s, what about people and their patent dates, which might cause a change in the pre-1914 riparian
Right.
relationship. And so, you know, there's a lot of work to be done there, and I think we need to clear out this post-1914 issue and move on to the remaining. I don't know whether or not there's enough advantage to fighting our way through a regulation right now, but I think I'll talk some more with my staff and maybe get back to the board about in the next day or two as to what our recommendation is regarding moving forward with a regulation under alternative 2 using, you know, just because we can move forward with curtailments without the regulation.
Right.
And, you know, that's just another workload to get a regulation completed. And the question is, does it really, you know, move us forward sufficiently that we want to expend the resources?
Right, even if better, it's a cost-benefit
So we'll get
analysis
back
in
to you
terms of
within a
the
couple of
system.
days with discussions with the board members about what we think about how that cost-benefit of moving forward with a regulation.
All right. A question about the voluntary agreements. One of the issues that came up is, obviously, it does take a lot of work as well. There are folks who came up with, you know, in the face of curtailment orders, feel they have a better way. You've mentioned some ways in which they're missing a part of the picture that we have to deal with, whether it's other water rights holders or other things. How do you want to deal with that other than folks need to give you what you ask for?
Well, you know, I think we're sort of out of time to a certain extent as well. My opinion is that we run the water right priority system, issue the curtailments. If people want to come in over the next couple of days, or if they want to come and talk to us after they've received curtailment notices and explain how a particular area can do better, that we are willing to withdraw those curtailment notices if they, you know, if there really is a proposal that meets the 2 criteria of no senior water rights being impaired and no unreasonable effect on fish and wildlife. As long as those 2 conditions are met and there's a voluntary agreement, my inclination is to approve it.
I would think it would be in everybody's interest to approve it if
Sure.
it meets.
I think it's very difficult for people to figure out how exactly to do that. And in many cases, it's not real clear to me that there's an advantage to some of the parties who sign these agreements, since, you know, a lot of them
one in
have
particular.
storage facilities. And so, but in any event, you know, we certainly would like to encourage negotiated agreements, and they can be approved at any time, and we can take so it's simple enough in the water right priority system to identify a watershed and just any notice that had been sent there. So there's been a negotiated agreement, and, you know, that's going to be used in lieu of the curtailment notice. So at this point, that's how I'd suggest to proceed.
Go ahead.
I think your proposal has great merit, and I strongly support it.
Yes, I think that's prudent, given the extensive discussion. I'm interested in your recommendation whether to proceed with the regulation or not, and we'll give that some careful thought. Thank you.
I'm also fine with your proposal, Tom, though I would like to have a follow-up discussion with respect to option 2. And let me take a moment and thank the staff. You've done an incredible job, not just these past few days, but all the events leading up to, and I'm sure all the events to follow on this issue. So my thanks to all of you.
Good. I mean, my request would be, again, I know I'm the sort of a broken record on this, but since there are people that you've spoken to about agreements, I would like either that you know who you've already talked to or people have come in, you have a conversation with them first to see if they're going to give you that information in the next 24 hours or in a very short time before you send out the notices. And if not, or even if so, the notices are going to need to have a pretty good narrative on it about openness to that and the criteria and what's required. Even if you're in a watershed where there's a discussion, I just think the communication piece of it is going to be very, very important, because we know either because it's complex and not understandable. I think in some cases people actually don't understand what their water rights are. It's not a critique, but it's an observation, or how water rights actually work. And I just think also for the parties who get it, they just really need to have a very good explanation that comes with it. The fact that you've already done a notice of a notice, I thought that was good. It was a good start. It got people on deck. The website is great, but I don't think we can communicate enough on this. So I would like you to try and talk before they go out with the folks who have already talked to you to see if they can meet your concerns, which are valid concerns.
Just in regards to communication,
Yes,
another
sir.
favor to ask again.
Yeah.
If I realize Tom's going to make a recommendation to the board, and the board's going to consider the recommendation about whether to go forward with rules and regulations, emergency rules and regulations, can we hear sooner rather than later, rather than getting a rule and regulation dumped on us, 5 days ahead of time, that the board is going to be moving forward with rules and regulations, so we can start preparing for that process? Is that fair? Or
I think
Isn't there a drought update on every one of our board meeting agenda?
Well, if we do a regulation, it might be on your next agenda, so
Okay.
It
we
might be.
would go ahead and once we've made a decision, let people know.
Yeah, I think more notice is better.
Thank
I
you.
agree, especially when we're doing things that feel novel or feel like they're upsetting an apple cart. I think we do need to give people a little time. I am about to lose my quorum, but we've given you feedback. Is there anything else? Can I have a ride partway home? Thank you very much for everybody's time and attention. Very thoughtful comments as well.